additions, players who can contribute immediately and elevate the defense in meaningful ways. But while those moves grab headlines, they're only a fraction of the story. Because beneath the surface, two critical situations continue to linger, and they may ultimately define how successful this offseason really is. Those situations revolve around George Pickens and Brandon Aubrey. When the offseason began, the Cowboys knew they had to make decisions regarding both players. Not necessarily final decisions, but strategic ones. Moves that would give them flexibility, time, and leverage. And that's exactly what they did. With Pickens, Dallas applied the non-exclusive franchise tag. It's a powerful tool, one that allows the team to retain control while still leaving the door open for future negotiations. It essentially says, "We value you, we want you here, but we're not ready to commit long-term just yet." In Aubrey's case, the Cowboys used a second-round tender, placing his value at $5.76 million for the upcoming season. Again, this is about control and flexibility. It protects the team while buying time to figure out a longer-term solution. But here's the issue. Time doesn't always bring clarity. And right now, clarity is exactly what's missing. According to Calvin Watkins of the Dallas Morning News, the latest updates on both situations are, well, not really updates at all. In fact, the most notable takeaway is that there hasn't been meaningful progress, especially when it comes to George Pickens. No contract talks, no negotiations, no momentum, just silence. That silence speaks volumes. It suggests that Pickens may very well play the entire 2026 season under the franchise tag. And while that's not uncommon in the NFL, it's rarely ideal. For players, it can feel like a lack of long-term commitment. For teams, it creates uncertainty. Of course, things can change. They often do. Between now and training camp, there is still time for discussions to begin, for offers to be made, for agreements to take shape. But there's also a deadline looming, a very real one. By July 15th, the situation will resolve itself one way or another. Either Pickens signs a long-term deal, or he plays on the tag. There is no middle ground. Meanwhile, the situation with Brandon Aubrey is arguably even more confusing. Not because of what's happening now, but because of everything that has already happened. To understand where things stand, you have to go back to the NFL Combine, where the first wave of reports began to surface. Early on, Clarence Hill reported that the Cowboys had made an offer to Aubrey that would make him the highest-paid kicker in the league. At the time, that title belonged to Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs, who was earning an average of $6.4 million per year. That benchmark has since been surpassed by Ka'imi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans, now sitting at $6.5 million annually. So for Dallas to make Aubrey the highest-paid kicker, their offer would have had to exceed that number. But how much higher? That's where things got messy. Reports from ESPN suggested that the Cowboys did indeed offer a deal that surpassed Butker's contract, but that Aubrey's camp was aiming significantly higher, reportedly seeking closer to $10 million per year. That's a massive gap, and it didn't take long for confusion to spread. At one point, Calvin Watkins reported that Dallas had offered Aubrey $7.5 million annually. But that report was later retracted, with Watkins issuing an apology and clarifying that the figure was incorrect. Adding to the uncertainty, Aubrey himself responded to a social media discussion about the report, calling it fake. But even that response was open to interpretation. Was he denying the $7.5 million figure specifically, or the broader narrative around the negotiations? No one really knew, and that ambiguity only deepened the mystery. Clarence Hill later added more context, noting that while the Cowboys did make an offer to make Aubrey the highest-paid kicker, it was not in the $7 million or $7.5 million range. He also revealed that Aubrey's agent countered with a $10 million annual figure, possibly as a strategic move to pause negotiations until both sides could meet in person at the Combine. Since then, nothing concrete, no confirmed numbers, no finalized deal, no clear direction, just a collection of reports, corrections, and unanswered questions. And that brings us back to where things stand today. The Cowboys have made moves. They've improved their roster. They've taken steps to position themselves for success in 2026. But when it comes to George Pickens and Brandon Aubrey, their present is uncertain and their future is unresolved. For now, everything feels like it's on hold, waiting, balancing, treading water. And in the NFL, that kind of uncertainty can either lead to a breakthrough or become a problem. The clock is ticking. The decisions are coming. The only question is, when they finally arrive, will they bring clarity or more chaos? That statement has echoed throughout the entire offseason, and the truth is, it hasn't changed. Not when last season ended, not when free agency rumors began swirling, and not even now as the new league year is fully underway. It's a reality that continues to hang over the organization like a cloud, because no matter how many adjustments they've made across the roster, one critical area remains unresolved: the middle of the defense. Under defensive coordinator Christian Parker, the Cowboys are trying to build something more disciplined, more aggressive, and more reliable. But without a strong presence at linebacker, that vision feels incomplete. Linebackers are the heartbeat of any defense. They call plays, stop the run, cover tight ends, and bring balance. Without the right players in that role, everything else becomes harder. And that's what makes this situation so interesting. As free agency kicked off, one name quickly surfaced in connection with Dallas: Patrick Queen of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Queen is a proven talent, fast, instinctive, and capable of elevating any defense he joins. But acquiring him wouldn't have been simple. It would have required a trade, and likely a costly one. Now, historically, the Cowboys have been cautious when it comes to big trades. But this offseason has shown a shift in mindset. Dallas is no longer sitting back and waiting. They're exploring, evaluating, and even initiating conversations when opportunities arise. That alone signals a change in philosophy. Still, things have taken a turn. According to reports from Nick Harris of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Cowboys have moved away from the idea of acquiring Patrick Queen. Whether it's due to trade demands, contract concerns, or simply a change in direction, Dallas has pivoted. And now, two new names have entered the spotlight. The Cowboys are reportedly discussing Azeez Al-Shaair and Jordan Brooks as potential solutions. Let's start with Al-Shaair. Currently with the Houston Texans, Al-Shaair is coming off a Pro Bowl season. He's the kind of player who brings energy, leadership, and consistency. His ability to read plays, close gaps, and make tackles in space makes him incredibly valuable. He's not just productive, he's reliable. And for a Cowboys defense looking to stabilize the middle, that matters. There's also a geographical factor here. Houston isn't far from Dallas, which could make negotiations more practical. But at the same time, trading within the same state and essentially strengthening a rival can complicate things. The Texans would likely demand a strong return, especially for a player coming off a standout season. Then there's Jordan Brooks. Brooks' story is different, but equally compelling. A Texas native, he's deeply connected to the state. He played high school and college football in Texas before being drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. More recently, he's been with the Miami Dolphins, where he elevated his game to another level. Brooks is also coming off a Pro Bowl season, but even more impressive, here in first-team All-Pro honors. That places him among the elite at his position. He's fast, physical, and versatile, able to defend against both the run and the pass at a high level. And here's where things get interesting. Compared to the Texans, the Dolphins may be in more of a rebuilding phase. That could make Brooks more accessible in trade discussions. If Miami is looking to reshape their roster, they might be willing to part ways with a high-value player in exchange for draft capital or younger assets. For the Cowboys, that presents an opportunity. But this isn't just about choosing between two players. It's about strategy. Dallas is clearly trying to avoid a situation where they're forced into a decision during the draft. In recent years, we've seen teams reach for players, selecting someone earlier than expected because of positional need. And while that can work out, it's always a risk. The Cowboys don't want to be in that position. They don't want to go into the draft needing a linebacker so badly that they feel pressure to take someone like C.J. Allen earlier than they should. Instead, they want flexibility. They want the freedom to take the best player available, regardless of position. And the best way to do that? Solve the linebacker problem before the draft even begins. But there's another layer to this story. What if the Cowboys wait? What if they don't make a move right now and instead let the draft play out? We've seen this approach before. Last year, Dallas had their eyes on Teteroa McMillan. They entered the draft hoping he would fall to them. But when he didn't, they had to adjust. Eventually, they addressed the position after the draft by acquiring George Pickens. That situation could repeat itself here. Maybe the Cowboys are interested in a linebacker prospect. Maybe they're hoping someone falls to them. But if that doesn't happen, they could pivot just like they did before and make a trade afterward. It's a flexible approach, but it comes with risks. Waiting too long could mean missing out on key targets. Other teams could step in. Prices could rise. Options could disappear. On the other hand, acting too quickly could lead to overpaying. So the Cowboys are walking a fine line. They're evaluating talent, monitoring the market, and trying to find the perfect balance between urgency and patience. And all of this is happening while fans watch closely, analyzing every rumor, every report, every hint. Because at the end of the day, this decision matters. The linebacker position isn't just another spot on the roster. It's a cornerstone of the defense. Getting it right could elevate the entire team. Getting it wrong could hold them back. So when you look at the options, Alshire or Brooks, it's not just about who's better. It's about fit. It's about cost. It's about timing. Alshire brings consistency and leadership. Brooks brings elite-level performance and upside. Both would improve the Cowboys immediately. But only one, if either, will ultimately wear the star. And that's what makes this story so compelling. The Cowboys are searching. They're calculating. They're preparing to make a move. The only question is, when they finally do, will it be the right one? Considering making a move for linebacker Patrick Queen, a recognizable name coming off productive seasons, and a player who many believe could instantly fix one of the biggest weaknesses on this roster. The rumors were real, the interest was real, and behind the scenes, conversations were happening. But just as quickly as the idea started gaining traction, the Cowboys pulled the plug. Quietly, but decisively, they walked away. And now, as more details continue to surface, it's becoming clear that this might have been one of the smartest decisions they've made in a long time. Because the truth is, the Cowboys are in a dangerous spot defensively right now. If you look at their linebacker room, it's not just thin, it's inexperienced and unproven. You're relying on players like DeMarvion Overshown, Shamar James, and Justin Barron, with two of those names essentially being rookies just last season. That's not the kind of foundation you want when you're trying to compete at a high level in the NFL. And when you combine that with how bad the defense was overall last season, it paints an even more concerning picture. The Dallas Cowboys ranked near the bottom of the league in almost every major defensive category. They were 30th in total defense, dead last in pass defense, and gave up a staggering number of touchdowns throughout the season. That's not just a weakness, that's a liability. So naturally, the front office started looking for answers. And that's where Patrick Queen entered the conversation. On the surface, it made sense. He's a known player, he's been productive, and he brings a level of experience that Dallas clearly lacks at the position. Reports even confirmed that the Cowboys were monitoring his situation closely, keeping tabs on what was going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers and whether a move could be possible. For fans, it sounded like the kind of move that could stabilize the defense overnight. A proven linebacker stepping into a struggling unit, bringing energy, leadership, and production. And to be fair, the numbers do look solid at first glance. Queen recorded 120 tackles last season, along with tackles for loss and quarterback hits. That kind of stat line suggests activity, consistency, and a player who is constantly around the ball. It's exactly the kind of production teams look for when trying to fix defensive issues. But numbers can sometimes be misleading, and when you dig a little deeper, the concerns start to show. Despite all those tackles, the impact plays just weren't there. Only one sack on the entire season. Limited disruption in the backfield. Not the kind of game-changing presence you'd expect from a player commanding a major salary. And that brings us to the biggest issue of all, the money. Patrick Queen would have come with a cap hit of over $17 million. That's a massive investment, especially for a player who isn't considered elite at his position. In today's NFL, you have to be extremely careful about where you allocate that kind of money. One wrong move can set your roster back, limit your flexibility, and force you into difficult decisions down the line. And according to league insiders, there were already complications surrounding his contract situation, including potential disagreements and uncertainty about his long-term value. That's not the kind of situation you want to walk into unless you're absolutely sure the player is worth it. Even Adam Schefter pointed out that the Steelers weren't necessarily eager to move on, suggesting that there were still internal factors at play, whether financial or strategic. And when you see that kind of hesitation, it raises even more questions. If the team that knows the player best isn't fully committed to keeping him under those terms, why should you be the one to take on that risk? At some point, the Cowboys evaluated all of this, the production, the cost, the risk, and the overall fit, and made a decision. They stepped back. They chose not to pursue the deal any further. And while it may not have made headlines in the same way a Blockbuster trade would, it was a move that could have a major impact on the team's future. Because sometimes the smartest decision isn't the one where you make a big splash. It's the one where you avoid a costly mistake. Now the focus shifts to what comes next. The need at linebacker hasn't gone away. If anything, it's still one of the biggest priorities for this team. But instead of forcing a move for a big name, the Cowboys now have the flexibility to explore better options. That could mean targeting a younger, more affordable player in the draft, or finding a veteran who fits the system without breaking the bank. Either way, the approach becomes more strategic rather than reactive. And that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. The Cowboys didn't just walk away from Patrick Queen. They showed a level of discipline that hasn't always been there in the past. They didn't chase a name. They didn't panic. They evaluated the situation and made a decision based on long-term value rather than short-term hype. And in a league where one bad contract can change everything, that kind of discipline can make all the difference. Because at the end of the day, building a winning team isn't just about the moves you make. It's about the moves you don't make. And this might be the move that quietly keeps the Cowboys on the right path. Failed once. Might not be dead after all. And at the center of it all was one name that immediately grabbed attention. One of the most feared pass rushers in the NFL, Max Crosby, because just weeks ago, it looked like to build. And this one had the potential to completely shake up everything we thought we knew about Dallas offseason plans, because suddenly there were whispers, reports, and quiet hints coming from around the league that a blockbuster move, one that had already failed once, might not be dead after all. And at the center of it all was one name that immediately grabbed attention. One of the most feared pass rushers in the NFL, Max Crosby, because just weeks ago, it looked like Crosby was gone, traded from the Las Vegas Raiders to the Baltimore Ravens in a massive deal that included 2 first-round picks, a price that told you exactly how valuable he is, exactly how dominant he can be when he's at his best. But then everything changed because that deal fell apart, abruptly rescinded after. Medical concerns raised red flags, specifically surrounding Crosby's knee after meniscus surgery. And just like that, one of the biggest trades of the offseason vanished, leaving Crosby back in Las Vegas, but not in the same situation as before because now there's context, now there's tension, now there's the reality that the team was willing to move him. And that changes everything, because even if Crosby says he's happy, even if the Raiders publicly commit to moving forward together, the door is no longer fully closed, it's just slightly pushed open. And that's where the Cowboys enter the conversation again, because before Baltimore stepped in with that massive offer, Dallas was right there, seen as one of the top contenders to land Crosby. But they weren't willing to go as far as giving up 2 first-round picks, and that hesitation cost them. But now, with the original deal collapsed, there's been growing speculation that maybe, just maybe, the Cowboys could circle back this time with a more calculated, more conservative offer, trying to take advantage of a situation where Crosby's value might be complicated by health concerns and team dynamics. And for a moment, that idea created real excitement among fans because adding a player like Crosby would instantly transform the Cowboys' defense, giving them a relentless, high-motor pass rusher who can take over games, who can pressure quarterbacks, disrupt defenses, and change outcomes in critical moments. But as quickly as that excitement started to build, reality began to settle in. Because behind the scenes, the Cowboys had already made a decision, And it wasn't the one fans were hoping for, because instead of staying aggressive in the pass rusher market, instead of chasing another blockbuster move, Dallas pivoted, stepping away not just from Crosby, but from the entire idea of adding a star pass rusher through trades or free agency. And that decision became even clearer when they chose not to pursue players like Trey Hendrickson, another high-level pass rusher who could have filled a major need. And instead, they made a quieter, more controlled move, trading a future fourth-round pick for Rashawn Gary from the Green Bay Packers, a player who has shown flashes of elite pass-rushing ability, but has also dealt with inconsistency over the past few seasons. And that move tells you a lot about how the Cowboys are thinking right now. Because it's not about making the biggest splash, it's about managing risk, it's about finding value, and most importantly, it's about keeping their draft capital intact, because according to reports, including insights from insiders like Calvin Watkins, the Cowboys are officially out on the Max Crosby situation, even after the failed Baltimore deal reopened the conversation. And that's significant because it confirms that Dallas is committed to a different path, a path that leans heavily on the upcoming draft to address their remaining needs on the defensive line. And when you really break it down, that approach starts to make sense, because as talented as Crosby is, there are real concerns that come with him right now. And those concerns start with his health, because knee issues, especially ones involving meniscus surgery, are not something teams take lightly, particularly when you're talking about giving up premium assets like first-round picks. And that's exactly where the Raiders are holding firm, because despite everything that's happened, despite the failed trade, despite the uncertainty, Las Vegas is not lowering their asking price. They still want that same massive return, and that creates a major problem for any team considering a move. Because now you're not just evaluating the player, you're evaluating the risk, the long-term durability, the possibility that you give up everything and then don't get the full version of the player you paid for. And that's a gamble that can set a franchise back years if it goes wrong. And it's exactly why teams, including the Cowboys, are hesitant to re-engage, because even though the idea of adding Crosby is exciting, even though the upside is undeniable, the downside is just as real. And for a team like Dallas that is trying to build sustainably, that is trying to balance immediate competitiveness with long-term stability, that kind of risk might simply be too much. And so, instead of chasing uncertainty, the Cowboys are choosing control, choosing patience, choosing to trust their ability to identify and develop talent through the draft. And that brings everything full circle, because whether it's linebacker, pass rusher, or secondary help, the Cowboys are clearly signaling that the future of this team will be built through those picks, through smart decisions, through calculated risks rather than desperate swings. And while that approach may not generate the same level of excitement as a blockbuster trade, it might ultimately be what gives Dallas the best chance to build a complete, balanced, and sustainable contender. But of course, in the NFL, plans can change quickly, opportunities can appear out of nowhere, and until the draft is over and the season begins, nothing is ever truly final, which means that even if the Cowboys are out on Max Crosby today, the story might not be completely over. But for now, the message is clear. Dallas is moving forward with a different vision, one that prioritizes flexibility, discipline, and long-term success over short-term headlines. And whether that decision proves to be the right one is something we won't fully understand until the games begin. And that's the linebacker position, because right now, if we're being honest, this team does not have a true leader in the middle of the defense. And that's not just a small issue, that's something that can completely define how far a team goes in a season, especially in today's NFL, where offenses are faster, smarter, and more explosive than ever before. And if you don't have someone who can read plays, communicate adjustments, and hold everything together in real time, things can fall apart very quickly. And that's exactly the situation Dallas is trying to avoid heading into 2026. Because as things stand today, the linebacker room is built around DeMarvion Overshown, Shamar James, and Justin Barron. And while each of those players brings something to the table, none of them has truly proven they can be that commanding presence, that defensive quarterback, that guy who takes control when things get chaotic. And that uncertainty is what makes this situation so dangerous, because the Cowboys are not a rebuilding team. They're trying to win now. They're trying to compete. And you cannot go into a season with a question mark at one of the most important positions on defense and expect everything to just work itself out. And what makes it even more frustrating is the fact that this isn't a new problem. This is something that has been building over time because the Cowboys have had multiple opportunities in recent drafts to address the linebacker position in a major way, and they didn't take them, passing on players like Nakobe Dean, Devin Lloyd, and Quay Walker, all of whom had the potential to step in and become foundational pieces of the defense. And now those decisions are starting to come back into focus because instead of having a developed, experienced linebacker entering his prime, Dallas is once again searching for answers. And that brings us to the biggest question of all, which is whether the Cowboys should wait until the 2026 NFL Draft to fix this issue. And the reality is that might be the worst possible approach they could take, because relying on a rookie linebacker to step in and immediately command a defense is extremely risky. It's one of the hardest transitions in football, not just physically, but mentally, because you're not just reacting to plays, you're responsible for understanding the entire offense, making adjustments, communicating with teammates, and executing at a high level from day one. And very few players could do that right away, which means if Dallas puts itself in a position where it has to draft a linebacker early and expect instant results, it's setting itself up for potential disappointment. And on top of that, going into the draft with such a clear and urgent need limits flexibility, because instead of being able to take the best player available, you're essentially forced into a decision. And that's when mistakes happen. That's when teams reach. That's when value is lost. And that's why the smarter move, the more calculated move, is to address the linebacker position before the draft even begins. And the good news for Dallas is that there are still options available. And not just any options, but experienced, proven veterans who could step in immediately and change the dynamic of this defense, starting with Patrick Queen, who represents the most aggressive and potentially impactful move the Cowboys could make. Because even though he's not currently a free agent, there have been discussions around the possibility of him being moved by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if that opportunity is real, Dallas should be paying very close attention, because Queen brings a level of durability and consistency that this defense desperately needs, having never missed a game in his career. And while he may not be the flashiest linebacker on every single play, he's the kind of player who does everything well, who raises the floor of the entire defense. And sometimes that's exactly what you need, not just highlight plays, but stability, reliability, and leadership. And if the price is something like a third or fourth round pick, that's a deal that could make a lot of sense for a team trying to win now. But if Dallas decides not to go the trade route, there are still veteran free agents who could fill that gap. And one of the most intriguing names on that list is Bobby Wagner, a player who has built a Hall of Fame-level career and somehow continues to produce even at this stage. And while age is obviously a factor, what Wagner brings goes beyond just physical ability. He brings experience, intelligence, and leadership, the kind of presence that can elevate an entire unit. And for a young linebacker group, having someone like that in the room could be invaluable, even if his role is more of a bridge while a younger player develops. And then you have players like Jermaine Pratt, who may not generate headlines, but consistently delivers solid performances, someone who can step in, stop the run, make tackles, and provide exactly what Dallas needs without unnecessary risk. And that consistency is something this defense has been lacking, and in many ways, it might be exactly what stabilizes the middle of the field. And then there's Bobby Okereke, who represents more of a bounce-back candidate, a player who has shown high-level ability in the past, but is coming off a down season. And while that might scare some teams away, it could also create an opportunity for Dallas to get a talented player at a lower cost, betting on the idea that he can return to form in the right system. And finally, you have Shaq Thompson, another experienced veteran who may not be a long-term solution, but can contribute immediately, bringing versatility, leadership, and the ability to impact both the run and pass game. And when you look at all these options together, it becomes clear that the Cowboys are not without choices. The real challenge is making the right one, because this decision isn't just about filling a position. It's about defining the identity of a defense. It's about deciding whether this team is going to be aggressive and proactive or patient and reactive, and in a season where expectations are high and the margin for error is small, that choice could ultimately determine how far the Cowboys go. Because at the end of the day, the difference between a good defense and a great one often comes down to what happens in the middle, and right now, that's exactly where Dallas has the biggest question mark, and until they answer it, everything else remains uncertain. Reshape the roster, address major weaknesses, and build a stronger, more complete team, especially after a disappointing defensive season that saw the Cowboys struggle in multiple areas, including giving up over 30 points per game, one of the worst marks in the league. And when you look at the direction of recent mock drafts from top analysts, a very clear theme begins to emerge. The Cowboys are heavily expected to focus on defense, particularly in the secondary and along the defensive front. And it all starts with the 12th overall pick, where different analysts have very different visions for what Dallas could do. With Dane Brugler projecting a